differ sharply, though there can be no doubt American supremacy is being challenged by a number of international players. However, if indeed the U.S. is in decline, aren't all Americans to blame? To crosstalk whether America is still number one, I'm joined by Bruce Fein in Washington, Senior Policy Advisor to Ron Paul 2012 presidential campaign, and the founder of the Lickfield Group and American Freedom Agenda. Also in Washington, we have Michael Hughes. He is a journalist and foreign policy analyst. And in Harrisburg, we cross to Jeffrey Lord. He is a former Reagan White House political director and author. All right, gentlemen, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. But before we start our discussion here, let's take a look at a very well-known clip from HBO's program Newsroom. Let's have a look.
Just in case you accidentally wander into a voting booth one day, there's some things you should know. And one of them is there is absolutely no evidence to support the statement that we're the greatest country in the world. We're 7th in literacy, 27th in math, 22nd in science, 49th in life expectancy, 178th in infant mortality, 3rd in median household income, number 4 in labor force, and number 4 in exports. We lead the world in only 3 categories: number of incarcerated citizens per capita, number of adults who believe angels are real, and defense spending, where we spend more than the next 26 countries combined, 25 of whom are allies. Now, none of this is the fault of a 20-year-old college student, but you nonetheless are, without a doubt, a member of the worst generation ever. So when you ask what makes us the greatest country in the world, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Yosemite? Sure used to be. We stood up for what was right. We fought for moral reasons. We passed laws, struck down laws for moral reasons. We waged wars on poverty, not poor people. We sacrificed. We cared about our neighbors. We put our money where our mouths were, and we never beat our chest. We built great big things, made ungodly technological advances, explored the universe, cured diseases, and we cultivated the world's greatest artists and the world's greatest economy. We reached for the stars, acted like men. We aspired to intelligence. We didn't belittle it. It didn't make us feel inferior. We didn't identify ourselves by who we voted for in the last election, and we didn't scare so easy. We were able to be all these things and do all these things because we were informed by great men who were revered. First step in solving any problem is recognizing there is one. America is not the greatest country in the world anymore. Enough?
Okay, Michael, very powerful acting and extremely powerful words. How do you react to that? I mean, because a lot of the facts mentioned there are correct, okay? They're easy to find, and they've been known for a long time. Now, is America still number one?
It may be, but there's a gradual decline. And it has to do with a lot of what he said. And a lot of it is political gridlock because of special interest groups. You know, we have a $16 or $15 outstanding public debt and $700 billion defense budget. And for some reason, we need to be projected worldwide. We have this global footprint that does not match up to the actual threats.
Okay, it's very interesting. Bruce, if I can go to you. Okay, go ahead, jump in.
I just say, I think the diagnosis is correct, but I think the reasons are wrong.
Okay, what are the reasons?
We shouldn't be a country. The reasons are that we have lost our way from what we were envisioned as a country from the founding. We shouldn't be going abroad in search of monsters to destroy. What would make a country number one is complying with the rule of law, honoring liberty over big government, making sure you have a level playing field so everyone has the opportunity to develop their endowments and faculties and achieve what their ambition in industry will achieve. It's not having government favor one side or the other side. And say honoring respect for international law and not invading anyone's sovereignty because we say that in our viewpoint you're harboring someone that sometime, someplace could be a danger to the United States, global projection of military power. Going back to what John Quincy Adams said when he was Secretary of State in 1821 before he was president, that we could be dictatress of the world. What our policy would then shift from a policy of liberty and freedom to a policy of domination and control. And now we are a country that's lost its way. And it's not because we may not be number one in the amount of arms we sell. You know, we sell about 3/4 of all the arms abroad or have the greatest military power, but because we lost our moral stature and values of who we are as a people. Our influence abroad should be the influence of example, period. We should have self-defense, but not preemptive warfare everywhere, which is where we are now and why we're resented around the world.
These are all nice things. Jeffrey, how did we get to this point then?
Well, I first of all, let me say in terms of what Bruce has just said, and I should note here for the record that Bruce is a former colleague from the Reagan administration. Although we've not met and I can't see him, I recognize his distinctive voice. And it's safe to say that Bruce reflects what I think has become a difference among conservatives about America's role in the world. And I certainly would challenge the thought that Congressman Paul has expressed and that Bruce just tried to do a thumbnail there of that we have never been in a situation where we've gone abroad and done all these things until relatively modern history. He quotes John Quincy Adams, who of course was the Secretary of State for James Monroe, who instituted the Monroe Doctrine, which basically drew a line around the Western Hemisphere, i.e. outside the borders of the United States, and said, if you come here, you're going to have trouble. So we have been getting involved in affairs outside our borders since the very beginning of this country's formal founding as the United States. That said, I certainly think that with the changes, with the end of the Soviet Union, the end of the Cold War, I think that there have been a lot of changes in this world that are self-evident to everyone. The rise of Islamic terrorism, etc. We need to have a strong economy. We can do that. And I would note about the clip from HBO and writer Aaron Sorkin, who pens the words and is a famous Hollywood liberal. You can take those words and go back retroactively and apply them to any time in American history. If the American nation was very strong at various
Jeffrey, if
points,
I can stay with you, do you think that the United States has had the same kind of debt problems? 30 years ago, 40 years ago, 50 years ago? I hardly believe that.
No.
Hardly believe that.
We certainly have the same kind of debt. We certainly are in a perilous situation here with the debt situation. There's no question about that. I mean, if you've noticed at the Republican National Convention, they have the debt clock up there inside the hall that is running second by second by second. So certainly people are extremely well aware of this. But what I am saying to you is that at any given moment in American history, there have been problems. I remember hearing the notion in that summation there by Jeff Daniels, who was the actor you were focusing on. He talks about how we did all these impossible things. Well, one of those things was going to the moon. And I certainly remember, I'm old enough to remember this, alas, I have to say, that there were people in the day who said we shouldn't have a space program. And they went through the litany of the day as to why, that we should be spending our money on education, we should be doing this, that, and the other thing. So that attitude has been around for a very, very long time.
Yeah, but we had the money to pay for it then.
Jeffrey,
if I can go to let me go to Michael here.
Let
me go to Michael here. Michael, do you think today's America is the same as any other time in history? I find that very hard to believe.
No, I don't think, as Newt Gingrich has says, I don't think we can colonize Mars. I don't think we have that budget. I think that's unrealistic, and the debt and the military spending is unrealistic that we need it to be that high, and it seems out of proportion to the past. But it seems like the attitude of the average American and our global reputation is at an all-time low.
Okay, Bruce, you wanted to jump in there? Where's the leadership
yes,
here?
number
Where's
one,
the leadership?
I'm not sure what
Because
going to the...
let me you know, people talk about the Republicans and the Democrats. You know, I live far away from that. It looks like a lot of nonsense to me because it all looks like is finger pointing. No one's taking responsibility.
Well, I think
the answer is
Let's go to Bruce.
That,
Let's go to Bruce. Go ahead.
Yes, I mean, it was once said that, you know, the difference between a communist and a capitalist is one believes in exploitation of man by man and the other is the opposite. And here we have the Republicans and Democrats, you know, one believes that government shouldn't be used to help one side against the other and the other believes the opposite. I think with regard to these issues of globalism, you know, projection of our military force everywhere in the world, there's not an inch of difference between the Democrats and Republicans. And I go back to challenge Jeffrey. I do not believe at the outset we're involved in foreign entanglements everywhere. We didn't get involved in the upheavals in Central and Latin America shortly after our own revolution or even the French Revolution itself. George Washington declared neutrality. It wasn't until the Mexican-American War, which John Quincy Adams opposed, where he had this idea of manifest destiny that enabled us to be the imperialists going around the globe, and then we continued on that trajectory until, you know, we ultimately come up to a debt problem now at $16 trillion. And it's typical of empires just before they collapse to believe, well, we've encountered these before, it'll all go the same way. Indeed, that was as true of the Soviet Union just before it collapsed in 1991. Everyone said, well, we've encountered these problems before, you know, there's nothing new is on the horizon. But that's simply not how empires collapse. It's typically on a precipice, not over a long period.
Okay. Jeff, do you want to reply to that before we go to the break? Very quick. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. I would say, you know, Ronald Reagan used to say, Bruce, and I'm sure you remember this, that freedom is not passed along in the bloodstream. That every generation has a responsibility to stand up for it and be responsible. Do situations change? Yes, but human nature does not change. Human nature is the same throughout history. So I do think that we're perpetually dealing with some version of the same problem. Are resources or economies or those kind of things different at any given moment in time? Yes, they can be.
Jeffrey, I'm going to jump in here. We're going to go to a short break. Gentlemen, we're going to go to a short break, and after that short break, we'll continue on our discussion on who's number one. Stay RT. Welcome back to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're discussing whether the U.S. is still number one. Okay, Michael, I'd like to go back to you in Washington, D.C. I mean, one thing I think is quite clear, maybe there's some nuances, but it's the middle class for the last 30 years has been plummeted. Okay, this is where the real crisis in America is right now, because people are being asked to sacrifice. The middle class has sacrificed a lot over the last quarter century, okay? And now everybody has to sacrifice. But there's not much left to sacrifice. What do you think?
Right. I think our number one security issue, our security threat, is our own economy. And the consolidation of wealth is to a dangerous level.
I would agree with that.
Today. It's at an all-time high. Okay,
Jeffrey, you want to agree or disagree on that?
Well, no, I agree with that, Michael. I think that the economy is always the number one issue in a presidential campaign. It is the issue right now, and there's a reason for it, because from the average person in the middle class all the way to the, as they say these days, the 1%, things have been very difficult. And without a strong economy, nothing else is going to happen for America.
Bruce, you want to...
But I think equally important, if not more important, is just the economy, is the fairness of the system. You know, we have TARP programs, you got all sorts of money spewed at green technologies. It's those who have the lobbyists who get the government on their side. Massive entitlements, the military-industrial terrorism complex, $500 million for a single plane. They're paying $28 for biofuels for the Navy. All those things make people cynical, not because they don't understand the ability and the willingness to be frugal and industrious, but if the playing field is all tilted in favor of one part of the community against another, that's unfair, and it creates a lack of legitimacy in the people. And I want to go back to the issue that Jeffrey raised about freedom. Freedom is what needs to be fought and captured by each generation, and that's what we're losing. We have a president who can assassinate U.S. citizens without due process, detain them at Guantanamo Bay with the U.S. military under the NDAA, intercepts our phone conversations, our emails, invades our privacy without any court warrants. This is our freedom that we're losing. We have all power concentrated in the president, Republican or Democrat alike, and that's what we need to stand up and recognize as our greatness as a government and as a people, not necessarily the GNP or what the average, household price is.
Okay, Jeffrey, if I can go to you, this program is broadcast to a foreign audience, just not in the United States. Would you please explain to me the difference between the Republicans and the Democrats in solving America's problems?
Sure. In a thumbnail sort of fashion, the nutshell, thank you, the Democratic Party believes in, has become to believe in central planning, that the government knows best, that government should be making the decisions. Republicans, at least in theory, and I can see Bruce smiling even though I can't see him, Republicans in theory believe in limited government.
Yeah.
Although I would have to say I probably agree with Bruce that there is more of our folks that depart from that philosophy than should be the case. I don't often agree with Congressman Paul on foreign policy, but I think he certainly has a point on, when we get to discussing whether we should eliminate 5 cabinet departments and things of this nature. The federal government of the United States, believe many conservatives, is far too big. And that essentially is the difference.
Okay, Bruce, would you agree with
But I want to build on.
Go ahead.
Jeffrey has said, I think he got it right. Even though the rhetoric on the Republican side may be for limited government, the facts are the opposite. Even take someone like Mr. Ryan, who's supposed to be the intellectual beacon of the Tea Party and of the Republican team there. He votes for the TARP program. He votes for bailing out General Motors, who votes for Part D to expand Medicare by $1 trillion per year. He votes for No Child Left Behind.